But that wasn't the worst of it. No, for 2 years before that, Curtis LeMay's technicians have been out in the Utah and Nevada desert building simulations of Japanese neighborhoods, wood and paper cities inhabited by civilians, and they were testing various types of incendiaries under various atmospheric conditions in order to figure out where they would get the best burn patterns to take out massive sections of populated areas. And that's the Tokyo fire raid, for example. 120,000 people cremated in one night. And this was not a military installation. And when the British were doing that to the Germans, which they did, the United States objected vociferously, refused to participate, did daylight bombing with the 8th Air Force. But you want to talk about innocent civilian targets, you ask the Germans what the 8th Air Force did to them. When the Germans were acting aggressive, expansing, establishing a new world order and announcing to everyone in sight, what we say goes, and slaughtering massive numbers of people in order to put themselves in the station that they had announced for themselves they were entitled to above, that's what Übermensch means, everyone else. And I don't hear too many good Americans with red, white, and blue banners standing out there condemning the 8th Air Force for being terrorists and obliterating German cities, daylight bombing or not. And I certainly don't hear them talking about what was done to the Japanese in over 100 cities in the LeMay's fire raids of 1944 and 45. I have no idea how many people died as a result of that. The people who were the planners actually stated for the record they wanted to kill every single Japanese. And yes, I'm aware of Pearl Harbor and the 2,500 sailors or whatever it was. And yes, I'm aware of Nanking, neither of which excuse what I'm talking about here in any way at all. And we can roll it back. We can jump a little bit. We can jump to the turn of the century, to the last of the Indian Wars, which was not fought against Indians in the United States. It was against people that were called the Indians of the Philippines. On the far side of the Pacific, when the United States invaded to liberate those islands from the Spanish Empire in order to turn it into its own colony for a forward strategic basing area for the next half century, they killed 600,000 to 1.5 million, what they pejoratively referred to as Moros. Hale Rohr and Jake Smith, general in charge, who had made his bones in the actual Indian Wars over here, proudly announced that he'd turned the most populous province in the island of Luzon, which was the most populous island of the entire Philippines, into what he referred to as a howling wilderness, that there were no people left in it at all. He had placed a bounty on the heads of every male over 10 years of age. That was the policy they don't teach you about in American history class, whether it's at the university level here or in your high school or your grade school. And if it's your grade school, you were too young to know. So they just don't talk about it, or they pretend the opposite of what it was that happened, happened. The opposite of everything in American history is true. That's the way they'll teach it to you. Yeah, probably kids are too young. When you're 6 and 7 years old, you shouldn't have to be exposed to this kind of vile stuff that I'm talking about tonight. But I got to ask a question. I got to return to education every once in a while in the course of every time I talk. Why is it, do you think, children are always too young to hear the truth, but never too young to be lied to, systematically, conscientiously, in the name of education? When you're talking about the Philippines, that begins in 1898. And that's 8 years after Wounded Knee and that mass grave that was photographed when they were dumping the bodies of the 350 Lakota old men, women and children that had been chased down in the snow 3 miles, coaxed into coming out and then beaten to death with rifle butts because they didn't want to waste the bullets, having cut the bulk of the people apart with Hotchkiss guns, unarmed and dismounted, immobilized, sitting duck targets, fired on from high ground by troops who got 30 medals of honor for this massacre. Yeah, they actually were awarded medals of honor for butchering women and children and dumping the bodies into a slit trench where they still, in that mass grave, to this very day. That was photographed. You take the photographs of them dumping those bodies of those Lakotas into that trench, and you put them up against pictures of Einsatz group and doing their operations in Eastern Europe, shooting Jews in the back of the head and dumping their bodies into anti-tank ditches, and people get confused as to which image is which. Yeah, these are separated in time. That was a long time before Hitler. I'll tell you what, Hitler came to power in 1932. Wounded Knee was in 1890. 42 is not a very long number of, or a very great number of years. I'm a little older than that. I mean, it would be within the span of my lifetime. Those are contemporaneous events, and he learned from what was done here what it was he was going to do there, and said so. No reason for him to lie about it. These are in the early days. He knew what he was basing his model on. Did he have it right? Did he have it wrong? Well, hell, I think he probably knew more about American history than most Americans do. You read his books, it suggests that he was a student of it, and most Americans aren't. In fact, most Americans aren't much students of anything. Most Americans can't remember anything longer than 15 minutes. And part of the reason for that is it's continuously fragmented in the way I was talking about. And when you do hear something, it's a runaway bride, and who killed John Benet Ramsey, and should Scott Peterson get the death penalty, and who really gives a good goddamn anyway? But once you're in that Indian massacre there, that Wounded Knee, and that actually wasn't the last of the Indian wars. I mean, the U.S. had Marines down in Mexico put down the Yaqui attempt to establish a free state in 1914. And that's simply a fact. And the fact that somebody drew this funny little line that Arnold Schwarzenegger wants to defend with your lives across the Sonora Desert doesn't alter the fact that those are Indians down there, and that's U.S. Indian policy when it's projected abroad, just the same as when it does here, because Indians are other countries, and it was always abroad when they projected that kind of military power against us. They don't teach you, well, they're telling you to uphold the Constitution, what the Constitution actually says, does it? Anybody out there, anybody, faculty, student, community member, good red, white, and blue-blooded American Republican, want to tell me what the 10th section of the first article of the Constitution says? Quick, quick, quick. You all ready to go die or kill other people? To defend the damn thing, you ought to know what it says. Fire away back there. We got a volunteer. I like volunteers. Airborne. You're going to be in the Army tomorrow morning. Righty right, you're reading it. What, do you carry the Constitution around with you? Good for you, man. You take it seriously. Y'all ought to do that. They have pocket editions. You can actually explain the law to the cops when they start to enforce it on you, okay? Real handy thing to have. Constitution of the United States. 10th article, or 10th section of the first article says that in order for the federal government, and that's the only entity in the United States can enter into a treaty relation, in order for it to lawfully enter into a treaty relation, the other party has to be a sovereign entity on the same footing as itself. It can't enter into treaties with states. It can't enter into treaties with provinces and counties and municipalities, boards of regent, PTA groups, or anything else other than another sovereign nation. Note, it cannot, in effect, enter into treaties with subparts of itself. Think about that next time you want to talk about American Indians with treaties being just another part of the United States, and they ought to get over it and get used to it. That's an illegal statement. It's contrary to the Constitution itself. Of course, your judges don't understand that, so it might be on you to educate them. You being non-Indians, it's your Constitution. We entered into compacts with you. Just thought I would demonstrate my conservative credentials, because I'm way more conservative. Everything I talk about is based on law. I'm way more conservative than those people out there. And that's a fact.